Good afternoon and welcome to this webinar on activities targeting zero emissions. Nowadays, the topic is crucial because, as you know, the world is not doing enough concerning the actions and interventions to tackle the climate change problems. Carbon dioxide emission energy related continues to increase after the famous Agreement of Paris 2015, peaking 33 billion tons in 2018, and also peaking the carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere at 410 parts per million, the maximum ever. Let's look at the energy scenarios by International Energy Agency, the most important and reliable organization in the world regarding future of energy. It collects scientists and experts from 40 countries and covers all the energies. It is, for us, the benchmark for the energy, for any energy outlook. Every year in its report, it defines the future scenarios for energy with clear indications of the actions necessary to reach the objective of maintaining the increase of world temperature within 2 Celsius degrees in the century. To do that, in the next 20 years, fossil fuels should pass from 81% of primary energy of today to about 58%, whereas the renewable energy from 14% of today to 33% of primary energy in 2040. The necessary interventions that account of 90% of the total reduction of carbon dioxide are three: more renewable energies, more energy efficiency, and more plants of carbon capture and storage and maybe utilization. On renewable energy, we are doing well with impressive cost reduction of more than 80% in the last decade and an outstanding increase of solar, photovoltaic, and wind. However, at the moment, only 2% of the world primary energy comes from solar and wind. Concerning the energy efficiency, we are not following the pathway indicated by International Energy Agency, although in some sectors, example, the circular economy, many technology applications and pilots plants are going on, especially for the process of waste to fuel or waste to chemicals. Besides, in all the sectors of energy, big opportunities of energy efficiency come from digitalization. Also very promising are the perspectives today for the hydrogen, blue or green. Interesting studies and pilots are going on. But we do need urgent industrial plans on such technological opportunities. Bad news from carbon capture and storage, unfortunately. Only a few plants, less than 10, are in full operation from coal power plant, gas power plant, and oil and gas fields. Only 30 million tons of carbon dioxide per year are captured. It is less than 1% of the quantity that yearly should be captured. So today is an opportunity to make the points on these crucial topics with 4 distinguished speakers. We start with Mr. Colombara, who is a partner and associate director of Boston Consulting. Boston Consulting offers worldwide consultancy and advice on all industrial sectors and, of course, on energy. He presents a general overview on emission with costs, problems, and opportunities. Mr. Colombara.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Giambattista, for the nice intro. Let me start from the big picture. So maybe next slide. You can also move to next one. Okay. When we talk about emission, we have to start with energy, as said. So beside coal, we have oil and gas counting for almost 40% of global emission. So 21 billion tons of CO2 equivalent. Out of this 40%, we need to consider that only 1/4, so around 5 billion tons, is Scope 1 and 2 emission of oil and gas company. Just a recap about the various classification of the scopes. So Scope 1 is the direct emission from own upstream and downstream assets. So it includes all the refining / field, the vehicles and so on. Scope 2 is the indirect emission. So from the purchase energy that I use to manage and operate my asset fleet. So it contains electricity, steam, heating and cooling for my own use. And then there is Scope 3. Scope 3 is different instead. It represents all the other indirect emissions that occur in a company's value chain. So it can be upstream, can be downstream versus my operation. It can include, for example, and it's very relevant in the industry, the company products. So mainly the care, the gasoline, the fuel I sold, but also the travel and the community part of the business. So worthwhile to note that Scope 3 represents 75% of the oil and gas emission. So generally speaking, for oil and gas company, the Scope 3 is 3 times more than the Scope 1 and 2. For the measure and for the IOC, so the big, let's say, international company who have already worked on their portfolio carbon intensity in the emission control of their production, this number is slightly different. So Scope 3 is 85% of the overall emission. So it's 6 times the Scope 1 and 2. So the Scope 3 cannot be left out of the picture. It has to be well targeted as well. Next, please. Okay, thank you. So we have seen the size of the emission to be tackled. Now let's look a bit at the implication in terms of euro. We ran a theoretical exercise with the scope of zeroing Scope 1 and 2 only. Okay, just this effort would require something close to 3 trillion of euro capex within 2050. For giving you an understanding of the size of the effort would be something close to 1/6, 1/7 of the full oil and gas industry investment that I remember is one of the biggest investors worldwide for the next 30 years. So it means a CapEx plan that is huge, and considering all the risk of CapEx cut that we are observing these days, this percentage would mean that with the green business, the transition business, the emission control business, the investment would be close to 20% more than the overall picture of the investment of the oil company. So let's look at the area of coverage. Okay, we expect high abatement of Scope 1 and 2 emission going through the operational level. So the first 2 buckets that you see in the slide. So the first effort is to directly cut the amount of my emission from my running assets in the current operating model. So efficiency and the reduction of flaring, reduction, for example, of the emission from fugitives, from venting, and so on and so forth. Let me be a bit provocative here, but these initiatives in these first 2 buckets are frequently lower CapEx, lower OpEx, and they are very, let's say, noble. So they actually cut the emission, but they are a bit underestimated in the overall portfolio because the project is very small and frequently not too nice to communicate openly. Okay. Then there is a second bucket of initiative. This is emission footprint and the own asset of our own asset management. So it improves, for example, the substitution of fossil in power and in heat generation, for example, with renewable sources, with alternative feedstock. And the last one, the light blue one, is once again switching to blue or green hydrogen, or let's say deploying carbon capturing with regarding my own process related, let's say. Okay. And then after all these, anyhow, will still be emission. And these are emissions which are contextual, so embedded in the oil and gas business. So to change a bit, okay. Can you hear me? Well, yes. Okay. Let's see. In order to attack this, you need to change a bit the equation. So you need to push on the transition. You can move to change a bit the production footprint. You can look for more, let's say, efficient field or supplying lower hydrocarbon with lower content of emissions or content of carbon, or you can shift to gas. But the message that you need to reduce your exposure to oil, diversifying from fossil hydrocarbon business. And the last bucket, which is available to try to completely, let's say, zeroing the emission, is offsetting. So it's promoting carbon reduction initiative outside of my operation, my own operation. It can be with natural-based solution, it can be with zinc solution, with bioenergy, with carbon capture and storage. In the future, with direct air carbon capture, or even more in the longer run, with enhanced weathering or ocean fertilization. This is a wide bucket of different, let's say, maturity levels, not always, let's say, directly responding to the real issue of, let's say, reducing the emission at the starting point. This is all related to scope 1 and 2. Considering that in the picture there is a huge also scope 3, we believe that the capex involved in this journey will be huge and become easily more than 8 trillion in the next 30 years. Maybe next slide, please. So in front of this number and these targets, we're really taking a step. Let's say that the European IOC are leading the action and they are converging toward a net zero for scope 1 and 2, and also a significant 50+% intensity reduction for overall emissions, so scope 3 included. Why that? Because of course they are under regulatory and investor and public opinion pressure, but also due to the fact that they all commit to sustainable development scenarios. So they are, let's say, taking seriously all the COP21, let's say, ambition, but at the same time, they link this ambition to a business diversification, okay? And maybe I can say that for some of them, green energy business is becoming, or will become in the future, something able to replace the big part of the oil and gas, let's say, heritage or legacy asset. Let me just comment, BP in the last earning call in Q2 22 announced that they will reduce oil and gas production by 40% in 2030. And in the meantime, they will invest up to 5 to 6 billion in green low carbon business every year. So it's a quick shift towards, let's say, a strong transition and changing a bit the role of the brownfield / the legacy asset. But when assessing and prioritizing these actions, and somehow also the opportunity to create a cash contributing business, oil and gas company consider or should consider 2 key factors. First one is the level of technology maturity. So in the metrics on the right-hand side is, let's say, the axis where you see maturity, and of course, you have different kind of maturity. If you want a profitable portfolio in the short term, positively contributing to my transition, I need something which is able to create business in and be deployed at scale in the next 5 to 10 years. So in my portfolio, I need something mature. But in the same, let's say, at the same level, at the same, let's say, consideration, I have to take the second axis, which is the decarbonization potential for the oil and gas company itself. So the business had to be deployed at scale in order to achieve my decarbonization targets. So I had to tackle, first of all, my scope 1 and 2, and then also being ready to deploy to, let's say, attack the scope 3. So which are the levers to deploy? Typically, an oilco can select opportunity with a portfolio logic, which are, in the first 10, more specifically, renewable power and forestation. Why that? Because these are 2 initiatives which are already mature from a technology perspective and useful to meet my scope 1 and 2 targets. Let me say something, just 2 words about forestation, because it's looked frequently as a not very noble solution. But this is a natural-based solution which is mature now and is expected to be deployed easily in the, let's say, in the short term. Why? Because there will be a huge demand for carbon credits. So there will be a gap of probably 1 gigaton equivalent of carbon credit in 2030. So also based on the current supply, the future projection of supply, we expect a gap of close to 0.3 already in 2025 gigatons. So forestation is probably a quick, not a resolutive answer, but something quick. Just to announce something fresh, Saudi, for example, today communicated the launch of a heavy forestation program in the kingdom. Okay, so more than 200 million mangroves and some more trees there. Then there is a second wave of initiatives. So a second level of business opportunity related to a change of the feedstock. So waste, alternative feedstock management. From one side to go in the 2G, so second generation biofuel, which is still expected to grow. As Giambattista was saying, it's something that we have already heard in the past, it's something which is already operational, but we still need to answer to the RED II or to the new regulation, close to 300 million tons worldwide of second generation biofuel in 2030. And then plastic recycling. So plastic recycling, of course, will contribute significantly to the corporate carbon intensity reduction. Of course, we have to fight against an issue. So we need a winning global model, and it doesn't exist yet. And the localized chain are fragmented and still somehow will limit the scale of deployment, particularly if the player interested is a large international IOC. Okay. And finally, in a portfolio logic, we need some more space for additional business opportunity, which are less mature now. From a technology perspective, for example, CCUs, hydrogen utilization to synthetic fuels are such an important answer to the needs of, let's say, the emission reduction, but it's something less mature now. So we still need a significant effort in order to have them fully operational, fully scale within 2030. So to be resilient and succeed, the portfolio of green initiatives need to be diversified across different technology, production, and particular geographies, to be visible in the agenda of the OilCo, but also being ready to deploy an organic growth, because the catalyst for development of this technology has to pass also through new venture and new, let's say, ecosystem of solution. Maybe I move to my next slide, which change a bit the tone and the perspective. So we talk about which are the opportunities, but let's look also at the significant step to go. So we still see, as GB was said at the beginning, a long journey, and the journey has not enough speed so far. But why that? So first of all, I think there is a significant issue. So the issue is so big that it's difficult to tackle at the beginning. So a lot of people are looking at this huge number of capex, the huge number of emission to reduce. With, let's say, that the issue of how to tackle that, how to cut the elephant in pieces, and how to be sure that we really have a bold answer to such a huge issue. And currently, the current context, the commodity scenario is not very supportive for such aggressive, bold move. But at the same time, as said before, I believe that we underestimate some small intervention, which strong and good business case, like the cut of the emission, the reduction of the emission, the consumption. For example, with digital or with some energy efficiency substitution, okay, you can have very significant cut and very significant result, even if are small, and you need a, let's say, a huge portfolio of intervention to make a, let's say, a difference. But just for giving a sense, so digital is one of the few initiative which is strongly cash positive. With, let's say, small intervention in Italy, for example, we were able to reduce CO2 emission of 2% with a time to market the solution of few months. Okay. And then there is another issue. So these investment that we mentioned before, point number 2, are, let's say, typically destined to technological partners, to venture, with the level of maturity that we discussed before, see frequently is very low. And this is typically not a traditional investment for the large IOC, and even worse for the NOC. So with very few positive business case, with the high risk related to some of this technology, we see a lot of board which are reluctant to invest with significant and bold moves. As said before, because frequently the business case are negative, yet still negative. And they require, to become positive, a strong and with longevity regulatory support. The regulatory framework has to be consistent and incentivize specific stream and penalizing specific emission to make this business case positive now. And we need them now in order to, let's say, activate the full ecosystem, from technology provider to OEM to value chain, which has to, let's say, interact and create a positive, let's say, context. This is certainly my 4th point, system, okay? So we need a larger ecosystem to make some of these initiatives, some of these models work properly. We need a hub logic, a value chain logic is required. So we need a leader, can be a technological provider, can be a large IOC, can be an off-taker, and we need other players to work together. So clients, supplier, OEM, to contribute to the overall economics of this solution. Let me mention one of the few virtuous examples, then probably Mr. Zek will introduce another one, but we support an exercise in Denmark with a large utility and a main infrastructure player. And even more importantly, the first player which were involved in this exercise were two huge international player, transportation player, so my off-taker, my consumption players, from the air to the sea. And they worked together to set up a flagship countrywide, so once again, institution-wide asset project to supply e-fuels, so syn fuels, with a clear roadmap, with a firm demand, with a clear offtake in the next 20, 30 years, okay? Last point, let's remember the portfolio logic I discussed before. So IOC and NOC, even worse, have a large brownfield asset legacy. We said that to succeed, you need high visibility, but this implies also organizational challenges. You need to manage with right level of incentives the full organization. You cannot demonize somehow the traditional business that I remember is the cash cow that support all the next wave of investment. So you need a common, integrated, and transparent mechanism to incentivize across the full organization. Just to close with the last slide very quickly, having said so, we expect a significant acceleration, a strong momentum in the next years, fueled by what? By regulatory pressure together with investor preferences, but also technology economics means OEM, technology player, which are ready to push for a cheaper and more stable technology in order to deploy at scale solution. Because I want to stress this, in order to succeed, we will need to deploy and take a scale all these initiatives. Okay. Maybe I pause here because the time is running over.
Thank you, Mr. Colombara. Now we continue with Mr. Monino. Mr. Monino is the Chief Executive Officer of Eni Solutions. That is a company of Eni. Eni is one of the major international integrated oil and gas company. And Mr. Monino will show us how an important oil and gas company is entering in the business of the renewable energy. Mr. Monino.
Thank you very much, Giambattista. Thank you to have invited me to this important event. So just a few words on who am I. I'm Patrick Monino. I'm the CEO of Eni New Energy. Who is Eni New Energy? Eni New Energy is a company. It's the Eni company who is responsible for all activities related to the renewable business are let me say, concentrated. So we are I'm responsible for the Italian and European business. And today I would like to share with you a brief presentation, and I think that some Q&A will arrive. So I will be free for any kind of question.
Excuse me, Mr. Monino, if I interrupt you, but at least from my position here, I don't hear very well. If you can modify a bit the position of your mic just to improve the quality of your voice. A bit better, yes, go ahead.
All right, thank you very much. So if we can start with slide number 2. Here we are, slide number 5. All right, can we go on? Thank you. All right, so just to link a little bit the presentation made by Federico, by Boston Consulting. So scope emission are, let me say, one of the most important parameters that we have to take in account when we talk about policy on emission reduction. So as Eni, we have presented a strategic plan in February, where we have a target of 2050 to reduce our scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions by 80% that's very important to highlight the fact that we are talking about scope 1, 2, and 3, because somehow, let me say, there is a big step in scope 2 and 3, as Mr. Colombara was saying before. As net carbon intensity, we have a target to reduce by 55% by 2050 our activity. So by the end, we will say that all our businesses will be net zero scope 1 and 2 by 2040. If we focus our attention on upstream activities, it's important to highlight the fact that our upstream activities will be zero emission of scope 1 and 2 by 2030. So you can imagine how important is the target that our board has put on us, on our company. So we are literally living a transition period that started with a huge, very important organizational modification. So the ENI has been split in two important divisions. We have natural resources with the upstream activities, so traditional ENI, and we have a new division named Energy Evolution, to which I belong, on which we have all activities of conventional and renewable generation business, retail business, gas and power, and we have chemicals and R&D. So so we are literally living a huge transition, not only on the business, but so it's very important to highlight the fact that we're living this moment with very, very important targets. If we go on slide number 3, here we have highlighted what are the main targets on different businesses that we have on 2050. I'm not going around on all of these, but let's focus on upstream. So upstream, we have we're going to be, our production will be at plateau on 2025. Then slightly our output will reduce, and there will be a very important shift between oil and gas. So by 2030, 60% will be gas and 40% will be oil. By 2050, we will have 85% of our business, oil and gas, focus on gas. So gas is going to be much more important in the coming years. On refining, we are going to make a strong turnaround of our activity, and by 2050, all our fuels will be sustainable fuels. So we are already 2 refineries in Italy that are biofuel, and we expect to have more in the coming years. And then coming to the division which I belong, so renewables, and we have a very strong investment plan. So we have a target 2050 of 55 gigawatts of installed capacity. 55 gigawatts of installed capacity is 4 times the installed capacity currently in Italy. So that's a very huge step. Coming to the presentation before, of course, as an IOC, we are investing also on new businesses that belong, according to us, would be very important. Probably not in 2020, but starting from 2030. So let's mention CCUS. We are working on a very important project in Ravenna. And, this will be a breakthrough project. And related to this, also hydrogen. Hydrogen will be a byproduct of that project, but we are working and studying not only on the blue hydrogen, but also we are taking in consideration investment in green hydrogen. So on this, we believe that in the coming decade, for sure, this will be an important part of our portfolio. If we go to slide number 4, please. This number 5, number 4. So what we're going to do on renewables. Renewables, we have the target in a short period, so by 2023 to have a 3 gigawatt of installed capacity. That would be around investment on in the coming 3 years of 2.6 billion euros. Just to give you some numbers, 55 gigawatt of installed capacity by 2050 would be around investment between 50 and 60 billion euros total as cumulative figures. That would mean around 2 billion euros investment per year. Our focus will be mainly in OECD countries, we start our activity working on strongly related to our upstream activity. So we started doing business in Africa, but now we are refocusing our attention on Europe and US. And we're going to do that working sometimes in partnership with the other companies. And we are going to have very strong commercial attention, because anyway, doing business in renewables at the moment is very important to have a strong commercial strategy. And on this, we have a strong internal partner that is our retail company. So any gas and power, any gas and luce, that is going to be our main customers. So far, if we talk about Europe. On technologies, at the moment we're working on solar and wind. We're taking a lot of attention through our R&D department on, I was saying before, on hydrogen, but in the short term on storage. Storage is a breakthrough technology that we believe is going to be very, very important in the coming years if we talk about business on OECD countries. On the last slide, it's just a brief synthesis of what we are doing in the short term, what we're doing now. If you see on 2023, at the moment, 3 GW will be mainly on solar and photovoltaic business. This is just on the short term. On the medium term, we're going to have a much balanced portfolio. We're going to invest a lot on wind, and we have studied different projects worldwide on offshore wind. That for sure is more related to which is our IDM as engineering, oil and gas company. So offshore for sure will be an important part of our portfolio. Let me say in the medium term, it's going to take a while. So this is just in a nutshell. So then for sure at the end, I'm ready for any kind of question and deeper analysis of what I've shortly presented.
Thank you, Mr. Monino. We continue with Mr. Iaquaniello. He is president of NextChem, a subsidiary of Meri Tecnimont, that is one of the largest contractors concerning engineering and construction. Mr. Iaquaniello illustrates the opportunities of the process of waste to fuel and also waste to chemical products. Mr. Iaquaniello?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will talk today about technology to use renewable feedstock. Let me say that we are going, as you are anticipating, first of all, the role of waste as municipal waste, also plastic waste, which are very important let's say, into the process of decarbonization. We also see application of CO2 recycle, and then I will discuss about green hydrogen from natural gas, which is not as let's say, a renewable feedstock, but in my opinion is going to play a role. Next slide, please. As I said, alternative feedstock and renewable power are really the cornerstone of decarbonization and really to reach zero emission. The use of waste will have an advantage compared to other, let's say, feedstock, which is mainly an economic advantage because you are going to be paid for disposing. So this will be, let's say, a major issue to deal with. In the process, apart from the waste, we are going also to use electricity. So these are basically the two pillars I was mentioning before. And the idea is to extract the carbon and the hydrogen from the feedstock transforming the syngas, of course, using waste, you need to purify the syngas, but then the syngas will allow to produce a sort of chemicals from fuels like methanol, ethanol, like urea, for instance, or hydrogen, or methane, or from methanol, you may start, let's say, to produce further chemicals. So the process itself, just to give a little bit more of detail, is an high temperature conversion achieved by pure oxygen, because in this way we are going to get rid of any, let's say, strange, put in this way, component. You get basically the HCO, a little bit of CO2, which is the right mixture to make the syngas. I said that apart from the feedstock, the waste feedstock, we are using power, which could be in the future also renewable, completely renewable power. So giving or adding another advantage to the system. And the reason why, first of all, we need to produce oxygen from the air. The second, the process here is basically working at low pressure. And of course, most of this chemical reaction, like for instance, the methanol or the ammonia, are happening to pressure. So you need to pressurize the gas. Few words on the economics. The economics of such a process, this is a process that you can deliver today, is competitive against, let's say, the current product produced by conventional means. Of course, it depends on the gate fee, as it had, the gate fee for, let's say, the revenue, the power itself, and of course, the final product. But this kind of process we have been discussing about technology to be implemented can be implemented today. Next slide, please.
Mr. Iaconia, just a second. I don't see your video, so I'd like to be sure that you have activated your video, your icon.
You see?
Okay, now you are on. Okay, welcome.
Okay, sorry.
It's okay, go ahead.
So this is a different process. It's also the maturity of the process is still a little bit behind what I shown before, but it's basically a different, let's say, a different process based on the use of sludge, which allow to produce a sort of biopolymers. It's the polyhydroxylate alkanate. It's an alternative thermoplastic polymers, and the process itself is sort of fermentation. So I'm using some specific bacteria where the sludge itself from municipal waste is transformed into the cell. So you need a certain point to break the cell and to extract this polymer. So this also is a very interesting example of, I would say, technology which could be implemented in 3-5 years' time. Of course, again, here we are going to have a problem of cost. The expected cost for such a polymer would be in the range of 2-4 euro per kilo, which of course it will require, let's say, specific application in order to compete with conventional plastic material. Next slide, please. CO2. There is a lot of discussion of CO2. What we are going to do with the CO2? Of course, CO2 can be used as a feedstock. The one that I present here is a scheme on the top part where the CO2 is transformed together with hydrogen, with green hydrogen, into methanol. On the bottom, you see a small plant realized in Iceland where more or less the concept depicted in the upper part are introduced. The question, of course, is how methanol may be competitive. Again, the problem is associated with the cost. We are going to see also this in the last slide, the cost of the hydrogen. And the cost of the hydrogen is related to the cost of the energy. So one case could be to use hydropower. Today, if you build a big dam in area where there is no demand, you may get reasonable, I would say, reasonable low cost for the electricity. This would be transferred in a lower cost of the hydrogen, which at the end could make very interesting to produce today the methanol in this way. The concept was here on the upper part was we recover the CO2 in Europe, we transport the CO2 in a remote area where we have, let's say, the possibility, in this case was a dam, so it was a really specific location in the lower part of Chile. We transform this energy available into methanol and then transport back into Europe. At the time we have done this study, then there was also the implementation of this plant. More or less, this concept was, let's say, in line with the production cost of the methanol. Of course, you cannot apply this concept everywhere because of the cost of the energy. The last slide is dealing with a different concept, and the concept is how we are going to produce hydrogen. Okay. Of course, there is a lot of emphasis today on the electrolysis, but if you look on the upper part of the slide, you're going to see the cost of the hydrogen on the left based on steam reforming, and on the right, of course, these are estimations depending, of course, of plenty of situations. One of these, of course, is the cost of the energy. Regarding the electrolysis, well, I want to propose here, maybe for discussion, a different approach. And the different approach starts from the fact that we are going to have to need natural gas in the future because we are consuming a lot of chemicals, and natural gas is one of the options. But it's also an option, in my opinion, to make hydrogen. Why? First of all, the steam reforming technology. In the steam reforming technology, you are making hydrogen not only from the methane, from the natural gas, but also from the water. Half of the hydrogen is produced from the water. Everyone knows that by converting natural gas and water into hydrogen, you are producing a large amount of CO2, 9 kilograms of CO2 per kilo of hydrogen. One way to reduce this is to provide the heat of reaction by an electrical source. So again, instead to burn something or to burn natural gas, you are providing this with an electrical heater, for instance, and this we are going to reduce to half the CO2 emission. The second part of this process, which by the way can be put in place on a second, let's say, period, for instance, is to transform the CO2 into a mineral. So basically what I'm saying is that you take the CO2, it reacts with some sort of silicate of calcium magnesium in order to form a carbonate. The issue is to look for application of such carbonate, okay? Because otherwise you are producing waste which need to be disposed. But if the trick is to find out how this mineralization product can be used for building, can be used for building material. In such a way, we think that also the natural gas can give a contribution for the hydrogen without emitting CO2. that's all for my part. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Iaquaniello. And now we have Mr. Keck, who is a Deputy Director of Net Zero Teesside project. This is the largest ongoing carbon capture storage in the world, and it regards an important industrial hub in UK. Mr. Keck.
Thank you very much, Mr. De Ghetto, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about Net Zero Teesside. As Mr. De Ghetto mentioned, my name is Ben Keck, and I'm the Deputy Project Director. Today, I'd like to really tell you a little bit about what the Net Zero Teesside project really is about, why I'm quite excited about it in terms of its advantaged location, as well as its key characteristics, which speaks very nicely to what Mr. Moninho talked about in terms of ENI as one of our project partners, one of their examples here. What Mr. Federico talked about in terms of some of the kind of challenges in the business model regulation and scale, which hopefully this project would demonstrate. And then speak a little bit as well to what Mr. Gaetano Iaquaniello talked about in terms of energy from waste and hydrogen, which is what this project will also be enabling. So let me go to the next slide. What exactly is Net Zero Teesside? Well, it's a carbon capture project, first of a kind in the UK, which aims to decarbonize a cluster of carbon intensive businesses, specifically in Teesside, where you can see a series of potential industries there, by as early as 2030 and deliver the UK's and hopefully the world's first zero carbon industrial cluster. As Mr. De Ghetto mentioned earlier, CCUS is critical to decarbonizing the UK economy and keeping global warming below a 2-degree increase. And specifically in the UK, where it's now legislated for us to reach net zero by 2050, the Committee on Climate Change has specifically highlighted that the UK alone would need somewhere between 75 to 175 million tons per annum of CO2 stored. This project that I'm going to be talking to you about, Net Zero Teesside, our initial target is up to 10 million tons per annum. So you can see we're one step of what I would think is a really big but very exciting challenge to meet the kind of critical issue of global warming and the climate change challenge, as well as being a really important project for demonstrating the commitment towards our energy transition. So what we are going to be doing here is to take CO2 from a series of industries and send it offshore to the North Sea, where we will be storing it in a saline aquifer, which has been studied quite well before. It's going to be possibly the largest saline aquifer store in the UK. And in the process, what we'll be doing is helping to decarbonize the industries, as well as creating new jobs and enabling some of the local industries to be continue remaining competitive in the UK. Specifically, I'll speak to those 3 points there. This will be looking to achieve the first decarbonized industrial hub. It'll be looking to, and underpinning that as a kind of base load of the concept would be low carbon power. So we'll be looking at building the world's first natural gas CCGT with carbon capture. That will be specifically designed to work in tandem with offshore wind, which has been extremely successful in the UK. And on top of that, what we'll also hopefully be doing would be enabling bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, which will result in negative carbon electricity. So if you take the combination of low carbon power that would displace and further decarbonize the electricity grid, take the industrial CO2 emissions, which we hope to sequester, and also enable fuel switching, which I'll talk about in a minute, and you take the kind of negative offsets together, all of that will actually allow us to get towards net zero by as early as 2030. So if you go into the next slide, I think the important thing we want to highlight here is it's got quite a lot of elements in here, but I think what's quite exciting is that Teesside is an excellent location to really try out all of these things, to really demonstrate how we get on a pathway towards net zero. One of the things I forgot to mention earlier in the slide is that today, this project is a partnership of 5 different international oil companies, hopefully international energy companies very soon, with BP as the operator, Eni, Equinor, Shell, and Total as partners. Mr. Moninho highlighted earlier, all of the companies here have quite a huge ambition towards getting to net zero. And specifically, what we have here is both Shell, Total, and all 3 Shell and BP, sorry, have direct experience of real CCUS operations currently. And what we're looking to do is leverage this experience from around the world to really kind of craft a project that we can be technically and environmentally sound, as well as economically, and leverage that to actually help create a blueprint and catalyze business models through policy that will allow us to hopefully then export this globally. But let me talk about some of the little details around Teesside. So first of all, why Teesside? Well, it's right next to the North Sea, which is a highly successful hydrocarbon province. But along with hydrocarbons, there are also quite a series of saline aquifers, which are proven today to be very safe stores for CO2 in the long term. So it's very near that, and we already have a store identified that has been appraised. So we are very confident it can store CO2 safely. The second thing is that Teesside is pretty much the heart of the process industry in the UK, a former giant ICI site. So you've got an area where it's very receptive to industry, and it's got a lot of the footprint already built out. So for example, right within that area, some of the kind of green and red lines that you can see there, those are existing pipeline corridors. It's got a hydrogen pipeline network already, and it's got a series of product pipelines which we can simply add on to without causing a lot of additional environmental footprint. It's very compact as well. You can see it's only 7 kilometers, about 10 kilometers end to end towards the coast, which means the initial infrastructure cost of putting the CO2 network together is going to be quite competitive compared to a lot of other industrial clusters in the UK. And it's concentrated as well. It represents about 5.6% of industrial emissions in the UK today, and is home to 5 of the top 25 carbon dioxide emitters in the UK for industry. So from a carbon reduction initiative for industry, enabling this to happen would actually make a real dent towards getting to the net zero target that the UK has targeted. And last but not least, there's also a heritage piece here. Teesside has long been at the heart of British industry, continues today with being some of the region's leading industrial businesses. So I'll point out a few there that's of a lot of interest. Firstly, at Tees Works itself, which we hope to build the power plant first of a kind. It's a former steelworks, and today it's received lots of government support to clear it out in the hopes of converting it into an industrial, a green industrial park. So there's a master plan behind that, multi-decade, which today there's real work being done on it to repurpose it. So there's that heritage, as well as obviously the skills and the people around that area. There's the Wilton site there that you can see, and it's got a host of industries, not least industrial chemicals, some of which Mr. Gaetano talked about. It's got existing biomass power plants and waste to energy plants as well. And then we've got, you see a logo MGT Teesside there. That's a new biomass power plant, which is soon to be operated, just under 300 megawatts, which if we take the CO2, would be pretty much the first large-scale biomass with CCS facility in the world. And again, it's very close, so it's fairly low cost of decarbonization. We've got the kind of known players as well, Suez for waste to energy, very well known there. And I think the kind of 2 crucial ones that will be part of what we envisage to be part of phase 1 of the project would be CF fertilizers as for fertilizers, because they're the lowest cost of CO2 to capture. In fact, one of their streams is pure stream CO2. So no additional processing needed other than some dehydration and compression. And we've got BOC there, which actually produces today more than 50% of the UK's industrial hydrogen. So capturing the CO2 there, which is relatively high concentration, will allow us to get blue hydrogen fairly quickly. And it's the second lowest cost of CO2 capture abatement in the Teesside area. And there's also existing production capability within BOC there. As soon as we can decarbonize that production, you've got blue hydrogen, and an existing hydrogen network, which will allow some of the other industries where carbon capture is a little bit less economic to actually go for fuel switching and use hydrogen instead to decarbonize. So I mentioned a few items there: carbon capture of the CCGT, carbon capture of BECCS, bioenergy, energy from waste. So that you're taking out some CO2 there. We're decarbonizing the grid. We're taking out CO2 from the industry, but enabling also blue hydrogen and hence hydrogen fuel switching to take away CO2. But also, last but not least, the bioenergy with biomass and energy from waste as negative offsets. And if you add all of those together, we've got a very clear pathway that we can actually deliver net zero for this cluster by as soon as 2030. So if we go on to the next slide, I just want to highlight a little bit about some of the impact as well, because along with the key theme here of enabling CCUS, I think what's just as important is the local impact and a fair green energy transition, particularly for kind of a post-COVID recovery, where I think lots of economies, including the EU and the UK, have been talking about to kind of build back better. You know, why are we kind of quite excited about this? Well, firstly, it would be at its peak, we anticipate that the gross value added, the GVA for this project would hit a peak of £450 million and support up to 5,500 direct jobs by 2025. It preserves the identity and the longevity of the businesses here as well, making it more competitive because of the green economy. And actually allows us to reach that net zero target, which also would help us attract new inward investment. And I think if we can build a clean energy park that has kind of clean energy, attracting new investment, that in itself would be a catalyst for growing the hub even further and actually becoming a center of excellence where we could eventually also export those skills, technologies, and the supply chain for the outside of the UK. So it's got some real direct impact starting from a hub. And I think one of the really important things here is that because it's a process industry for probably over 100 years, that's got a real skill set there that we can tap into, which would create a really long legacy of process industries to continue sharing skills and transferring skills, not just in the oil and gas industry, but also in the chemicals and downstream industries to actually make CCUS happen. So we've got all the ingredients there. And today we're quite ready to go forward. In fact, next Friday, we complete stage 2 of our consultation for our development consent order for the power component of the project. And we expect we can get into front-end engineering and design the next stage as early as the second half of next year and be able to start this project as soon as 2026 with the right policy in place. So if we go on to the final slide, I think one of the things I want to touch on here as well is what Mr. Federico talked about in terms of government support and policy. Well, that's really important, not because we want to do yet another CCUS project with grants, but really it's about trying to create scale. If you look at the global CCS industry report, what you'll see today is that a lot of the projects are almost sort of one-off pilot plant projects or EOR, oil and gas price dependent. But to really get the efficiency and the reduction in CCUS costs and hence allow it to really grow at scale, not just in the UK, but globally, it really requires a lot of these to be built. I mentioned there's 0 MTPA today in the UK of CO2 being injected. We're looking to grow that to up to 75 to 175 million tons per annum in order to get to the net zero by 2050 target for the UK alone. And I think in order for us to do that, we need a lot of such projects around the world. So what Net Zero Teesside is hoping to do is create this kind of one-of-a-kind but replicable concept that we can use in the other industrial clusters that we showed earlier. Each one will have a slightly different characteristic. But what we found is when you look across the UK sectors, you find quite a lot of the similar industries. There's always typically fertilizer industry, lowest cost of capture CO2. There's BECCS elsewhere, like in the Drax facility, currently in the UK, in Humber, and there's lots of other very similar kind of industries and setup. I had a quick look just in terms of looking at Google Maps at Ravenna itself, and I noticed that today Ravenna also has quite a thriving fertilizer industry. So there's some similarities there. In fact, if you look at the map itself, you could probably see geographically it's got some similarities in terms of the mouth of the port and some of the industries around that. So is it replicable? Yes, absolutely. And that's really something we are very keen to do. And I think as a kind of global picture there, to paint a global vision, with the partners that we've got on this project, I mentioned BP, Eni, Equinor, Shell, Total. Shell, Total, and Equinor in particular have, I think, taken sanction case for the Northern Lights project. And so there is a case here about building a hub that also shares CO2 imports and export with other countries, the most immediate being Northern Lights. And then secondly, for the reservoir that we have to also serve Humber and some of the other industries there. I mentioned Drax, with a very large CO2 export, as well as the Humber region being the largest industrial CO2 emitter in the UK. And also, one thing I didn't touch on earlier, but is available in Teesside today, is CO2 import and export. It's a very small quantity, but there's a bit of infrastructure already there. And if we grow that a bit further, that would actually allow for CO2 imports from Europe that will also support continental Europe in their decarbonization efforts using these sort of natural endowments of the UK continental shelf to store CO2 for the long term. So there's really quite a lot more that this project can grow into. In fact, Net Zero Teesside is already registered as a project of common interest in the EU database. And so we're a project that's ready today, and we are working with the UK government very closely to enable the right policy and business models to be in place. And we really look forward to realizing this, as I see it meeting a lot of the aspirations of not just the partner companies, but also what we've heard today from all the other panelists today. And with that, I'll end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Keck. Now we have received some questions from the audience. We have about half an hour to try to answer to these questions. And the first relates is for Mr. Iaquaniello, absolutely. Using biological methods to capture carbon dioxide and produce biofuels would be beneficial or would cost too much? Gaetano, it's for you.
Yes. Well, I'm not an expert in CO2 capture with biological means. Unfortunately, I'm a chemical engineer. But I don't mind. I mean, you can use a biological, physical. At the end, the issue is how much it's going to cost, from my point of view, of course. So any system at the moment able to catch, let's say, the CO2 from the flue gas or from a process side would be fine, if it's able to compete. As you are saying at the beginning, the implementation of such a project in the nearby, in my opinion, is mainly related to the cost of production of the chemical that they are producing. So, at the end, it's important to find processes which are really simple and cheap.
Very clear. Another question is absolutely for Mr. Keck. Say about the consultation. How mature is the public about CCUS project acceptance regarding the potential risk, carbon dioxide leakage, influence of earthquake, etc.? How the operator of the project has approached the external communication strategy? Mr. Keck?
Thank you for the question. It's a very good question. In fact, if you ask the general UK public about CCUS and whether they understand it very much, it's probably not, right? It is quite complicated in some sense. But I think I want to answer this question, I guess, in two parts. The first part is that the public in itself has got a local element to it as well as a national element to it. Within Teesside, one of our biggest proponents is actually the local authority and the mayor. So through his office, we've been very open about sharing information, and they've been actively promoting the project very much on our behalf because of the legacy that we can create together with the jobs and supply chain. And on that front, I think the public there is pretty supportive, and we're working it through the local authority. On the kind of national front, I think what we're doing is very actively engaging NGOs and also the government. So in fact, what we're very keen to do is not for this project to be a set of private companies just developing a project looking to make a profit. What we're really doing is this project, what we see is helping fulfill the purpose of where the Department of Business, Energy, Industrial Strategy, as well as the UK government want to head towards. So we're working hand in hand with the government and working through some of the research organizations there and use those channels in order to publicize what CCUS is about and why it's important for us to get to net zero. So I think the short answer is how we support our external communication strategy is really underpinned by working closely with the government and local authorities as well as NGOs at all levels.
Thank you, Mr. Keck. Another question perhaps is for Mr. Colombara. And he says, since the policies for the decarbonization are more effective, more global they are, how do you see the carbon dioxide market around the world? Which is its state in Europe, China, etc.? Moreover, why automotive and transport are outside the ETS system in Europe? I don't know if Mr. Colombara could try to answer to this question.
It's not exactly my domain, I would say, but I mean, policies, let's start from the beginning. Also, policies for decarbonization more effective, more global they are.
Could you please speak louder, Colombara?
Yes.
Close the mic. Yes, thank you.
Yes. I said it's not exactly my domain, but let's start from the beginning. So more effective, more global they are. Definitely if they are able to create some sort of consensus or similar to what happened with the COP21, okay? And to create a bit of peer pressure among the different states and different regions, okay? Even if we saw that that is not always working. Also, US is slightly lagging behind versus EU. China is definitely taking let's say, a significant speed, but based on its own, let's say, priority and policy making priority. So I would say that let's say the CO2 markets are taking a shape in the different system. Of course, in Europe with the ETS, we have a definitely more structured way. US is not as defined as it is, but is still considering which kind of regulation to put in place. So it's really, let's say, a regional perspective on the way to manage it. I don't know if I answered the question, but it's a bit difficult to find the right answer. With regard to the ETS scheme, there are like a different, let's say, step for the different industry to be part of it. So it's probably transport partially is. So it's a normal, I think, I don't know if ENI colleagues has a different perspective, but it's a journey, no? And more and more industry will be taken actively included in the ETS scheme, no? So for example, now also chemicals has different level of, let's say, participation or refining itself. So year after year, they will get more and more part of the ETS, reducing also the, let's say, the warranty or the space to be compliant to that.
Thank you, Colombara. I have a question for Mr. Monino. ENI, as all the competitors, are aggressively entering in the business of renewable in the last few years. So the question for is which was at the beginning the difficulties in dealing with this brand new business for the oil and gas company, but we refer, of course, for ENI. And on the other side, which are the synergies. So in some way, maybe the oil and gas company have been facilitated in dealing with this business. So opportunities, synergies, and difficulties for you, Mr. Monino.
Yeah, thank you. So in your question, Mr. Deghetto, you were using the past. I will use the present and the future, because in a way, we are all dealing with something on business model on which we are not used to. It's not in our idea, and so it's something on which we have to work a lot, and all our peers are suffering as we are struggling. Everybody is changing completely its organization. New people should join the companies, because anyway, we're talking about segments of business on which we are not used to. I joined ENI 5 years ago. I'm coming from private equity, from the business, so it's something that all the oil and gas companies should. It's a kind of mix, of course. So it's a change of mentality. We just completely changed our organization. I was saying before, we split the traditional business from the new business. This is what our board decided, and if it's going to be the right solution, we will see. But anyway, BP did the same, Shell is doing the same, Total did already put in the renewables with gas division 4 years ago. So anyway, struggling, so it's different. Synergies, a lot. We're used to very complex, and you were part of this, of our company for many, many years. So our engineering department is absolutely outstanding, and we're used to do business offshore. So why I was saying before that offshore wind is going to be anyway something on which we are going to be part. But anyway, for example, Equinor and BP and Shell and Repsol already have been part, or anyway, Equinor is a leading oil and gas company on offshore wind, and we have immediately very important synergies on that. So let me say, maybe we are less competitive. I will find less synergies on traditional and conventional photovoltaic and onshore wind. So I think that we will find many synergies on new business like hydrogen, CCUS, and the repeat offshore wind.
Thank you, Mr. Monino. And there are other questions here. Maybe is for Gaetano Iacquaniello. The question is the production of methane from green hydrogen a possible solution to unlock renewable power production from North Africa to the European market? Could be such approach feasible even in the perspective of a huge amount of energy storage?
Well, very interesting question. I would say yes, in the sense that it's more or less what I was suggesting for the methanol. Okay? Of course, you need to have a source of carbon, either from Europe, as the UK project, and was willing to export the CO2. The issue, however, is to better understand how you're going to store energy, in the sense that the methanation process, which the gentleman is referring to, is a more or less conventional process. So it's not anything strange, although of course there is a different configuration to achieve it, but it's a continuous process. So the issue is here how we are going to have a continuous energy flow into let's say the electrolysis to provide the hydrogen. And I think that solving this issue and making a feasibility study regarding the cost of the hydrogen produced in this way and the transportation of CO2 can give an answer. But in principle, yes.
Okay. Now we have a question that is for all the panels, but maybe Mr. Keck is more in the picture on concerning this question. That is, what are the thoughts, the panel's thoughts on the current ability to have accurate and verifiable true carbon emission from any kilowatt of electricity produced. As all industrial processes have environmental impacts, do we need a global standard for measuring the full supply chain emission for the energy produced?
That's a very big question. I think I can. I'm just going to share some thoughts here, at least for Net Zero Teesside. Well, one of the things that we have established, at least in terms of from the kind of operators processes on the BP side, is a very kind of clear carbon accounting system when it comes to looking at Net Zero Teesside as an investment opportunity relative to the others. So it's not just about economic return, but also the actual carbon footprint. So there is a very kind of clear and rigorous carbon accounting that underpins this project in terms of the power generated, what we can actually take as a credit, and also in terms of the kind of wider industry, what's the actual impact. So I think some of those best practices in development that's being rolled out specifically for Net Zero Teesside. I think when you talk about the supply chain itself, that's a wider picture there, right? So as much as we can, today, I'm not sure kind of how much is the premium for kind of low carbon products, but we expect that to increase. And I think the only thing we can do is to be very cognitive of that when we go out to market, to actually ask for suppliers to start giving us either certification or to actually prove, for each component we take into this project, what exactly is the kind of carbon footprint, and to kind of total that up. I think for kind of just from a project perspective, that's what we can do to instigate it. I think on a kind of more global basis, if I can just talk very briefly about why we think dispatchable CCGT carbon capture in the UK makes a lot of sense. Well, that's because when we look at a deregulated electricity market like the UK, it's highly competitive, but also highly dynamic. It can be quite hard to actually attribute what exactly is the true per kilowatt hour cost on a levelized cost of electricity basis. So for example, offshore wind actually has a headline number, but also a system integration cost when the wind doesn't blow and you need some other form of energy to supplement it. So if we take the total energy system and create scenarios such that if you have gas with CCS versus without, you can do a subtraction and actually understand what that total value is and why it's the best and lowest cost pathway towards getting to net zero by 2050 vision. I think on a similar basis, you can do the same calculation in terms of the carbon footprint. And indeed, that's what we've done in terms of our modeling, where there's a price assumption on the CO2 together with a projected escalation of that carbon price in order to actually work out what is that lowest cost pathway and what is the total energy system value. So I think if we use that as the starting point and we make the requirements in terms of going out to the supply chain for truly lower carbon, but also economically competitive products, and I think we bring that together, I think that was hopefully start kind of creating a standard or a system. In terms of kind of coordinating kind of globally, I think we're very happy to kind of contribute to efforts like that. And I think I'll come back to the piece about scale. The more projects that start doing this, the easier it is to establish a global common standard.
Thank you, Mr. Keck.
Mr. Chairman, can I add something to what Ben, because I think this is a very interesting question, you know, and although today the life cycle analysis may give an answer, there is not, in my opinion, a proper way to, let's say, evaluate which are the overall emission on a specific process or in a specific product. And I think it's essential at the end. Now, I'm say, looking at the Italian situation where, for instance, we are pushing for electric car, and 2/3 of power is produced by carbon-based fuel. So really, you know, is something evaluating, you know, if, let's say, at the end, such a solution in terms of CO2 may compete, for instance, with biofuel. So I think that what the gentleman was raising is a very important question. We need to normalize, to have a standard method, which will allow really to have a clear and, let's say, manageable way to evaluate the CO2 emission for any process.
Thank you, Mr. Iaquaniello. Now, I think it's time to close our interesting event. I have some closing remarks. I have seen that all the players around the reduction of carbon footprint are moving fast, and some also in an aggressive way. In all sectors of carbon dioxide reduction, technology exists. We have a lot of technology, but the cost is still a strong hurdle. Enormous efforts are going on technology development, but the probability to have a technological breakthrough in the short term to reduce cost is very, very low. So the unique solution seems to be the economy of scale to reduce the cost. But to get it, we need an aggressive general involvement of regulators and policymakers, and also external financial support to technology scaling up. A must, in my opinion, is also a closer cooperation between government, academia, companies, and local communities. Only with this we will reach the difficult objective of zero emission 2050, 2070, and finally contain the increase of world temperature within the 2 Celsius degrees. I conclude thanking the speakers, the organization, and of course, especially you all who have followed the event till now. Enjoy the evening and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.